The great Victorian mansion stood as a proud symbol of power, wealth, and certainty. Its tall windows caught the daylight like polished mirrors. Its stone steps were scrubbed clean, and its wide staircases rose with quiet confidence. Everything about the house suggested calm, order, and effortless luxury. To the outside world, it looked like a place where life moved slowly and comfortably, untouched by struggle. But this beauty rested on something carefully hidden. Beneath the elegance existed another reality, one built on constant labor, discipline, and silence. Behind the decorated doors, under polished floors, and inside narrow corridors never meant for guests, a second world came alive every day long before sunrise. This was the unseen world of servants. Dozens, and in large houses sometimes hundreds, worked together to keep the household functioning. Maids, footmen, cooks, kitchen helpers, laundresses, grooms, valets, butlers, and housekeepers filled every corner of the house with movement. Their lives were ruled by strict schedules, precise duties, and a discipline that left no room for error. For servants, the day began while the house was still wrapped in darkness. Bells rang sharply through attics and basements, pulling tired bodies from shallow sleep. There was no gentle waking, no slow morning. A servant had only minutes to wash with cold water, dress in uniform, and begin work. Fires had to be lit in every room, floors swept, water carried upstairs, and food prepared before the owners stirred. By the time the family appeared, the house had the look as if it had awakened on its own. The greatest rule of service was invisibility. Servants were trained to move quietly, to appear only when absolutely necessary, and to vanish the moment their task was complete. Their success was measured not by praise, but by absence. Silence was not simply good manners, it was a professional requirement. The ideal household was one where comfort seemed to exist naturally, without effort, as if the house itself provided warmth, order, and food by magic. A Victorian house was not just a place to live. It functioned like a living body. The masters acted as the mind, making decisions and giving commands. The servants were the muscles, blood, and senses that carried those commands through every room. Every movement mattered. If one task failed, the entire system felt the strain. Because of this, the household followed an almost military structure, where discipline held everything together. Time ruled the house with absolute authority. Fires were lit at fixed hours. Rooms were cleaned in a strict order. Meals appeared at exact moments, neither early nor late. This rhythm never changed, regardless of weather, illness, or mood. The house did not adapt to people. People adapted to the house. Servants learned to measure their lives not in days, but in bells, tasks, and routines that repeated endlessly. Each servant had a narrowly defined role. There was no flexibility, no crossing of duties. A maid did not cook, and a footman did not scrub floors. Every task belonged to a specific person. This specialization ensured perfection, but it also limited freedom. Many servants spent years doing the same job, repeating the same movements, day after day, without variation or rest. The house itself was divided into two separate worlds. Upstairs belonged to the masters. These rooms were bright, warm, and filled with fine furniture and decoration. Downstairs belonged to the servants. Basements, attics, narrow staircases, and shared rooms formed their living space. These worlds existed under the same roof, but rarely touched. When they did meet, the interaction was controlled, formal, and brief. To keep these worlds apart, the house relied on clever systems of communication. Bells ran through the walls, each with a different sound. An experienced servant could tell which room called simply by listening. Later, speaking tubes allowed orders to be given without any face-to-face contact. These systems existed to protect the illusion that the owners lived without interruption or effort, untouched by the labor that surrounded them. Servants learned how to move without leaving a trace. Their shoes were made to soften footsteps. Doors were closed slowly, never slammed. Voices stayed low at all times. If a servant met an owner in a hallway, the servant stepped aside, lowered their eyes, and became still until the owner passed. Even presence itself had to disappear. This structure reflected the wider society of the Victorian era. Class divisions were clear and rarely questioned. Just as society was layered from top to bottom, so was the household. Everyone knew their place, and stepping outside it was difficult and dangerous. The house trained obedience not only through rules, but through repetition and fear. The system worked with remarkable efficiency. A small group of people enjoyed comfort, warmth, and leisure because a much larger group labored quietly to support them. Everything appeared smooth, polished, and orderly on the surface. Yet beneath that order lay exhaustion, control, and sacrifice. Looking back, it forces an uncomfortable question. Was this structure the peak of organization and discipline? Or was it a refined system that demanded people erase themselves to keep beauty alive? At the heart of the servant's world stood the butler, a man whose importance far exceeded what outsiders could ever imagine. To the public, he was simply the person who poured wine, opened doors, and announced guests with quiet dignity. But within the walls of the mansion, he was the ultimate authority among the male staff, the chief organizer of the household, and the most trusted figure of all. He was the central pillar on which the smooth operation of the entire house rested, the one who ensured that the invisible machinery beneath the polished floors functioned without a hitch. Every male servant, from footman to valet, answered to him. To disobey or fail him was to risk not only a reprimand but dismissal, an event that could destroy a servant's entire life. The butler's power extended across hiring and firing, discipline, and the oversight of every detail managed by male staff. Footmen, valets, and other household men all relied on his guidance and supervision. He maintained the order that allowed the household to appear effortless to the masters above. Rules were not merely suggestions, they were commands backed by the weight of authority. In his hands, the house became a disciplined machine where every motion had its place, and every task was carried out with precision. The butler's role demanded more than skill. It required vigilance, wisdom, and the ability to anticipate issues before they arose. He was not just an enforcer, but the administrator who kept the invisible world of the servants spinning flawlessly. The most potent symbol of the butler's authority was his keys. They were more than metal objects. They represented the control of everything valuable in the home. The butler managed access to the wine cellar, the silverware, and often the private chambers of the master. The wine cellar alone could contain bottles worth more than a year's wages for an average worker, and the butler's meticulous management of it was a sign of both trust and responsibility. He knew every vintage, monitored temperatures, kept careful records of consumption, and advised his master on selections for dinners or social gatherings. A single error could cause financial loss, yet the butler performed these tasks invisibly, with the quiet assurance that his judgment was trusted implicitly. Appearance was another instrument of his authority. Unlike the footman who wore bright formal livery, the butler's attire resembled that of a gentleman, a dark, tailored suit, signaling his elevated status within the servant hierarchy. He was a servant, yes, but a servant who existed closer to the masters than anyone else in the household. His neatness, posture, and calm demeanor conveyed competence and reliability. In the formal spaces of the mansion, his presence was felt more than seen. He was a bridge between the family above and the world of labor below, maintaining a silent control that ensured the household ran like clockwork. During dinner parties, the butler's role transformed into that of a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony. He rarely touched a dish himself. Instead, he directed footmen with subtle gestures, glances, or nods, coordinating the timing of every plate, dish, and glass. The flawless execution of each meal, each change of silver, each refill of wine depended entirely on his expertise. The success of these gatherings, the seamless illusion of ease enjoyed by the masters, rested squarely on his silent authority. A single mistake could disrupt the entire evening, yet the butler ensured that nothing ever appeared out of place. In addition to oversight and coordination, the butler managed the household finances tied to his responsibilities. He maintained meticulous expense records, purchased supplies, and accounted for every shilling spent. This required literacy, numeracy, and absolute honesty. The trust placed in him by the master was immense. Any misstep could lead to immediate dismissal. Despite this responsibility, his life was solitary. He belonged to neither the servants fully nor to the masters, existing in a liminal space where knowledge and discretion defined his value. He often witnessed the family's private quarrels, their illnesses, their intimate habits, and every secret he observed had to remain unspoken. Silence was his most powerful tool, and discretion was his currency. Within the servant world, hierarchy dictated every interaction. Staff were divided into upper and lower servants, each with clearly defined roles. The upper servants included the butler, the housekeeper, the personal valet of the master, the lady's maid, and sometimes the head cook. These individuals had direct access to the family, commanded authority over others, and were responsible for ensuring that the household ran smoothly on every level. Their proximity to the masters gave them privilege, but also a weighty responsibility, and their conduct had to reflect competence and decorum at all times. The lower servants formed the labor backbone of the house. They scrubbed floors, carried coal and water, washed dishes, and performed every physically demanding task necessary for the household's operation. Their quarters were cramped, often located in basements, attics, or narrow wings, and they were rarely seen by the masters. Yet despite their invisibility, their work formed the foundation of the mansion's comfort. Without their effort, the appearance of elegance and ease above would collapse entirely. The servants' hall provided a visual representation of this division. Seating at meals followed strict rank. The butler sat at the head, the housekeeper to his right, while the youngest and lowest-ranking servant occupied the seat nearest the door. In the largest households, this hierarchy was enforced to the point that upper servants did not eat alongside the lower servants at all. They had separate rooms and superior food, often served by the very hands that labored in the shadows. Clothing marked distinction as well. Upper servants wore carefully tailored attire, often of better quality in fabric, while lower servants had uniforms that were functional but plain. Titles were formal for those at the top. Mr. or Mrs. followed their surname, while the lower staff were addressed by first name or job title. Social interaction between ranks was discouraged and sometimes forbidden. Friendly chatter across the hierarchy was seen as improper, a breach of etiquette. This internal segregation ensured order, prevented the formation of alliances among lower servants, and reinforced the system's control. Every worker was focused on maintaining or improving their position rather than questioning the authority above. Ambition and diligence were rewarded slowly, but loyalty, patience, and obedience were always essential. Advancement within the household hierarchy was possible but arduous. A kitchen assistant might aspire to become a cook, or a junior footman to rise to the position of butler. Yet such journeys could take decades. Promotion demanded constant demonstration of competence, absolute discretion, and unyielding commitment. The few who succeeded were often those who had spent their entire lives in service, learning every nuance of the household's needs, mastering every chore, and embodying a combination of skill and tact that few could achieve. This internal hierarchy was more than an organizational tool. It mirrored the class system of the upper floors. Servants emulated the attitudes, snobbery, and divisions of their masters, reinforcing the social structure they themselves were subject to.
The house became a miniature version of Victorian society, rigid, stratified, and meticulously maintained.
Within this contained universe, every gesture, every glance, every word of a servant carried meaning, and the subtle enforcement of status and rules shaped daily life as powerfully as the mansion's grand architecture. The butler, as head of the male servants and central figure in this system, exemplified both the authority and isolation of this world. He was a man of knowledge, skill, and judgment, commanding respect, yet permanently bound to the hierarchy that kept him subordinate to the family. His keys, his gestures, his vigilance, and his silence defined not only his own position, but the function of the entire household. He lived in a space where trust and discretion outweighed personal comfort, where influence was subtle but immense, and where the smallest mistake could unravel years of meticulous order. In this way, the Victorian household was not simply a collection of rooms, servants, and masters. It was a living, breathing organism. Butler was its nervous system, guiding the male staff and keeping the invisible mechanisms in motion. Every other upper servant, from the housekeeper to the valet, was part of this finely tuned machine. The lower servants provided the strength, endurance, and labor necessary to sustain it. And all of them, from the highest-ranking butler to the newest under-housemaid, lived within a framework that demanded absolute obedience, precision, and respect for the hierarchy that defined every moment of life under the mansion's roof. This rigid and sophisticated system allowed the masters above to enjoy a level of comfort and order impossible without the complex hierarchy below. It was a world of discipline, loyalty, and silent power, where every servant understood their role, their limits, and their place in the social order. The butler's life, though lonely and demanding, exemplified the pinnacle of responsibility in this hidden world, a life of knowledge, discretion, and authority contained within a structure that mirrored the grandeur and discipline of Victorian society itself. Alongside the butler stood another figure of immense power, the housekeeper. She was the queen of the female servants, silently ruling the inner life of the household. While the butler ensured that everything ran smoothly in public, the housekeeper maintained order, discipline, and cleanliness in the hidden corners of the mansion. Her presence was never loud, but it was absolute. Every maid, laundress, and often even parts of the kitchen staff answered to her. No task could be completed without her approval. Every plan, every schedule, every correction of mistakes passed through her meticulous eye, sharp and unwavering. She carried a set of keys hanging on a chain at her waist, as prominent in her authority as the butler's were for him. These keys opened the linen rooms, pantries, and cupboards that held all the household's provisions. Every candle, every towel, every bar of soap was accounted for under her watch. She controlled the supplies, monitored their usage, and prevented waste with near-obsessive precision. Nothing was wasted. Nothing went uncounted. The house ran on her vigilance, and even the slightest mistake could earn a reprimand. Records were her constant companion. The housekeeper knew precisely how many sheets were in use, which ones required repair, and where every single item was stored. Laundry was perhaps her heaviest responsibility. Victorian households used massive amounts of linen, and every sheet, towel, and tablecloth had to be cleaned, repaired, and replaced in perfect order. She tracked it all, ensuring that every guest room, every bed, every dining table remained flawless. Her system was rigorous, unyielding, and essential to the smooth running of the home. The housekeeper's room was her command center, a place of authority and planning. Here she kept her ledgers and account books, issued supplies, and received reports from senior maids. She planned the workday and monitored progress with an almost military precision. But this room was also a social space for the upper servants, a place where they gathered briefly to rest or consult with her. It reinforced her status, showing that she was not only a manager, but the undisputed leader of the female staff. Her word was law, and every gesture, glance, or instruction was obeyed without question. Below her worked the maids, bound by a single, simple rule: never be seen. Their work had to vanish, as though by magic, completed while the family ate breakfast, left for appointments, or entertained guests. If a maid ever crossed paths with a member of the household, she pressed herself against the wall, lowered her eyes, and became part of the background. Any disruption of this invisibility was considered a failure. Maids were divided by rank, a hierarchy as strict as the one above stairs. Senior maids oversaw the most important rooms, including the master bedrooms, and ensured that every corner reflected perfection. Parlor maids handled the formal rooms and assisted during meals, their movements elegant and precise. Junior maids, or underhouse maids, performed the hardest work. Their day often began before the sun rose, at 4 or 5 in the morning, and stretched into the late hours of the night. These junior maids carried coal, lit fires, hauled water, emptied chamber pots, scrubbed floors, and beat carpets. The work demanded extraordinary physical strength, stamina, and endurance. Uniforms were strict and ever-changing. Dark, durable dresses for dirty labor, then clean white aprons and neatly pressed caps for when they might be seen. Every detail of their appearance reflected their discipline, and failure to maintain this standard was never tolerated. Maids moved exclusively through the back stairs and service corridors, forbidden from front halls and main staircases unless necessary for work. Their movements were deliberate and quiet, like shadows gliding through the arteries of the house. Despite their invisibility, they were the keepers of secrets. Cleaning bedrooms and personal spaces gave them intimate knowledge of the family's lives, habits, moods, letters, and private objects. Yet, silence was law. Any gossip, any breach of confidentiality could result in dismissal, ruining both career and livelihood. Life for a servant followed unyielding rules. Workdays could last up to 18 hours. Days off were rare, almost non-existent. Behavior was strictly controlled. Laughter, loud voices, and casual speech were forbidden. Interaction with the family required precise phrasing. Yes, sir, no, ma'am, and even eye contact had to be measured to avoid perceived insolence. Personal lives were monitored. Servants could not receive guests or entertain relationships without permission. Uniforms had to remain spotless and properly pressed at all times. Dismissal was the ultimate fear, hanging over every servant like a shadow. Losing a position meant losing not just income, but also shelter, food, and stability. Without a strong reference, finding employment in another respectable house was nearly impossible. Accusations of theft, even if unfounded, could destroy a career forever. The mere hint of dishonesty could close doors permanently, isolating a servant socially and economically. Among the staff, two roles stood apart: the master's valet and the lady's maid. These personal servants lived closer to their employers and answered only to them. They managed clothing, grooming, and travel, knowing the most private and delicate details of their master's life. They handled wardrobes, polished shoes, styled hair, repaired garments, and packed trunks for journeys. Their proximity offered privileges denied to others, yet it also brought isolation. Other servants often viewed them with suspicion, considering them spies or informants for the family. Like the butler, personal servants occupied a unique position, privileged but never equal. They were constantly aware of the delicate balance between service, discretion, and loyalty. Their work required patience, tact, and absolute invisibility, for a single misstep could threaten not only their position but their very livelihood. They were witnesses to the family's private world, yet they were outsiders in every sense. Their lives were a blend of honor, secrecy, and loneliness, threaded through the invisible hierarchy of the Victorian household. Fear shaped every corner of a servant's life. From the moment they woke to the ringing of the early morning bell until the last task of the day, fear was constant. Fear of making a mistake, fear of being accused unjustly, fear of losing their position. Every action was scrutinized. Masters, mistresses, the butler, the housekeeper, and even other servants watched constantly, ready to judge. A dropped plate, a stain on a tablecloth, a misaligned chair, or even a hesitant glance could trigger a reprimand or dismissal. The pressure was relentless, leaving little room for error, hesitation, or even human imperfection. There were no protections for the servants. Losing a job could mean far more than financial loss. Without work, a servant risks being thrown onto the streets, left with no roof, no food, no hope. For many, the alternative was a workhouse, a grim place with harsh labor, meager rations, and strict rules that punished even the smallest infraction. Reputation was everything. A single mistake or accusation could taint a servant for life, closing doors to other respectable households. Once a name was stained, even innocence offered no redemption. Accusations of theft were among the most feared. When something disappeared, the servants were the first to be blamed. Even unproven suspicion could destroy a career. A whisper of dishonesty followed a servant forever, limiting their opportunities, forcing them to take lesser positions, and sometimes leaving them completely unemployable. The social consequences were devastating. A servant could be innocent, yet the shadow of doubt haunted them permanently, a silent punishment more cruel than any reprimand. Women in particular lived under an added layer of anxiety. Their prospects outside of service were extremely limited. Leaving a household often meant risking poverty, homelessness, or dependence on family members who could barely provide for themselves. Many felt trapped between exhausting, tightly regulated labor and the uncertainty of life beyond the household walls. This made obedience, caution, and careful conduct not just professional requirements, but essential survival strategies. Yet, amid this harsh and unyielding world, small joys offered moments of relief. The servants' hall was a sanctuary, a place where laughter could break through, gossip could be shared, and news exchanged away from the ever-watchful eyes of their masters. Meals, though simple and sometimes leftovers, were reliable and nourishing. In a society where hunger and scarcity touched so many, This was a privilege few could afford to take for granted. Free time was scarce, but deeply cherished. A short walk on Sunday, a visit to church, or a brief meeting with relatives provided glimpses of a world outside service. In some households, the annual servants' ball became a rare escape. For a few hours, social hierarchies softened. Servants could dance, laugh, and enjoy companionship with their peers, forgetting the constant rules and expectations that otherwise ruled their lives. These fleeting moments strengthened morale, human connection, and resilience. Friendships among servants were intense and unshakable. Shared struggles, long hours, and mutual reliance forged strong bonds. Small gifts from masters during Christmas or other holidays were highly valued, not for their material worth, but as tokens of recognition and respect. They confirmed that, even in a rigid hierarchy, the work of the invisible army mattered and was appreciated. Professional pride was another source of comfort. Impeccably polished silver, perfectly made beds, smooth service during dinners, and flawlessly cleaned rooms were tangible achievements. For many servants, excellence was a measure of personal worth. Reading, quiet storytelling, and brief moments of leisure provided emotional respite, allowing them to endure the repetitive and physically demanding tasks that consumed their days. Behind the grand facades of Victorian houses lay a hidden world shaped by discipline, fear, loyalty, and relentless labor. These homes were more than stone and wood. They were intricate social ecosystems powered by countless unseen lives. The rhythm, comfort, and elegance experienced by the masters relied entirely on the precision, diligence, and sacrifice of their servants. Understanding this hidden world illuminates not just the mechanics of Victorian life, but the enduring value of unseen labor. The legacy of these invisible workers continues today in modern hospitality and service industries, shaping the ways comfort, luxury, and order are maintained. Their lives reveal a timeless truth. The ease of some has always depended on the tireless work of others, often hidden, often unacknowledged, but essential to the world we see.